Welcome back to another episode of Broke Up, Not Broken. If you're going through a divorce, don't worry, you're not alone. This is your one-stop shop for mastering your life and your finances throughout the entire divorce process. In today's episode, we're delighted to have Ralph Estep, founder of Saggio Management Group and the host of the Ask Ralph podcast. Ralph brings extensive expertise in accounting and tax services, offering tailored solutions to both individuals and business financial challenges. Today, we'll discuss the pivotal role of financial management in navigating life's transitions, such as divorce, and how to effectively handle tax obligations during these challenging times. So whether you're just starting to consider divorce or you're in the thick of it, this episode is going to equip you with the knowledge and tools you need to master not only the personal challenges you might be facing, but also the financial ones. So grab a cup of coffee or your beverage of choice, buckle up, and let's once again get you personally and financially empowered. Hey, Ralph, man, it's so great to have you here.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. So we were talking in the lead up to this conversation of ours here today about our personal experiences with divorce. So anything you want to share in that realm with us so the listeners can get a better understanding of who you are as a person?
Sure, absolutely. I went through this at age 8. Now, I wasn't getting a divorce, but I was the victim of the divorce. Maybe you could say that. So I remember distinctly like it was yesterday. We had some folks coming in from out of town, and as soon as the folks left, my dad sort of summoned my mom to a back porch meeting. My sister and I was 8 at the time. I guess she was 4. And we sat there in the rec room just wondering what in the world was going on out there on the back porch. And it seemed like it was taking hour after hour. And then all of a sudden I heard my mom sobbing. And I said, well, this isn't good. You know, my sister and I had thought about, maybe they're planning a trip to Disney World, or maybe we're going to do a cross-country trip together or something like that. And as soon as my mom walked in the door, I could see the tears in her eyes, and I knew my world had changed. And I'll never forget, what my dad said. He was leaving, he's packing up, he's leaving. And he said, all right, son, well, you're the man of the house. Wow. Yeah. 8 years old. I'm not ready to be the man of the Lego set, much less the man of the house. And it impacted me. And I'll tell you, it's a big reason why I do what I do now. I look at, this whole thing of financial advice and doing this daily podcast. I have a Christian finance podcast, so I have a bend to mine. It's all about bringing those two worlds together. And I've been asked, why do you do what you do? And I said, because I saw the impact of it. I lived in these crazy two worlds. And not that my dad didn't remain in my life, because he did. Mm-hmm. But my mom was very, I don't want to say poor, but very of moderate means. And my dad was the opposite of that. And we would bounce back and forth every weekend of, when my mom's idea of going out to dinner was, let's go to Burger King, kids. And my dad would go to the best restaurant in town, and we dropped $200 or $300 on the dinner. Mm. And I remember, my mom sharing with me, I've got $2,000 in my checking account. And I'm thinking, my dad just bought a new Mercedes. Mm. So think about that from the standpoint of a kid, in that early years, those teenage years. So that was all my impression about divorce. And then when I started my own practice, I've seen the way it just impacts people. It is a huge issue, and it's really difficult. And it poses a lot of problems for people going through it, not just emotionally, but financially. I can't tell you how many clients I've had that it's wrecked their finances. It just has. And it's a sad thing, but that's kind of my story to get started.
It is a sad thing, man. So how did you process that as an 8-year-old? Like, that's a big deal. My parents were divorced roughly around the same age. So I remember realizing early on, like, wow, this is because maybe similar circumstances in some ways where we had family and friends that would bring us groceries because our pantry was so empty and it was such a challenge for my mom. And my dad wasn't, driving a Mercedes by any stretch. I mean, he worked 2 jobs, and, they got married very young, I think, 22 and 20. So they were effectively doomed from the start and didn't have any education or anything. So they had that challenge. So they were, frontline workers and laymen, and it was challenging for both of them. But this is a different dynamic. I don't know if I've even heard this before, where there's such that disparity in lifestyles.
Yeah, it was interesting, my friend, because, I went from the kid who was running off to the park with his friends, when you're living on the street and the kids go flying by in their bikes and you hop on your bike and take off to the park with them. But not for me, because it was a situation where my mom's in the backyard trying to get the lawnmower to start. And, you're the man of the house. I'll never forget this story. And this is a crazy one. I was probably about 11 or 12 years old. I had a sleepover with some friends one night. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. We lived in a split level home, and I still remember my mom hollering. And I'm thinking, what is going on? My friend nudges me. He's like, dude, your mom's hollering. And I walk out the door and she's standing at the bottom of the steps. She goes, Ralph, we have no heat. And I'm 10 years old, dude. I'm like, what? Okay. What do you mean we have no heat? You know, I'm wondering if we're going to go get pizza and go to the mall later, or maybe you're going to drop me off at the skating rink. And here I am trying to figure this out with my mom. We're down in the basement, banging on the side of the water, oil heater, trying to figure out, does it really have heating on or not? And so it was such a crazy childhood. And it really made me focus in on what I could control. And in other ways, it focused in on what I couldn't control. I became that obese kid. I became that kid who took all the things and did the things that sort of get through the day sort of thing, you know, and it was tough, but I guess in a lot of ways it made me grow up quicker. It made me realize the value of education. And in many ways it was a positive thing too, because I didn't have that childhood. Like for me, it was the reality of, here's another great story. I'll tell you another funny one. So I'm 13 years old. My dad had bought my mom a car before he left. I remember it was one of them Honda Civics, right? And it looked like an egg, right? And it had the two front seats and the back. And so my sister and I were always fighting over who's going to sit in the front seat. So my mom says, you know what? This car has had it. I'm going to go buy a new car. And so, of course, she drugged me and my sister with her, and we go down to the local car dealership. She found this Grand Am she really liked, and it was cool. You know why I really liked it? Because it had 4 doors. No more fighting over who's going to sit in the back. So we get into the car dealership. We sit down. Now, I'm 12 at the time, maybe 12 and a half, 13. Sit down. She works out this deal with the sales guy. You know, they did this back and forth playing ping pong with the sales manager. And finally, the guy says, all right, well, we're ready to take you into the finance office. So my mom gets ushered in, and dude, at this point, I'm thinking like, can I shake my mom down for some money for the vending machine so I can get like a can of Coke or a Pepsi and some snacks, some Doritos or something like that? And the guy, the finance manager, starts talking. And he says, my mom's name's Ista. Now, she passed away last year, but Mrs. Ista, we've worked this up for you. And I know you talked to the sales guy and your payment's going to be this. Well, we had just talked to the sales guy and her payment was going to be no more than $300 a month. I remember distinctly. Well, we got into the finance office. All of a sudden it was $375. And my mother looks over at me. She says, son, what do you think about that? Now I'm 12, dude. Like seriously, I'm 12. I'm not a high finance guy. And I'm just like, well, you told the guy out there the guy told you it was going to be $300. Now it's $375. Something doesn't sound right. Well, with that, the finance manager looks across the desk and goes, shut up, kid. And I'm like, wow. And my mom's kind of taking a double take. And then he starts trying to sell their credit life and credit disability and this and that. And I'm just sitting there taking it all in. Again, I'm thinking about what's going to happen after we leave here. You know, we're going to stop at the Burger King, get some food or something. And my mom starts crying in this finance man's office. And she's like, Ralph, because he stepped out for some reason. And she goes, Ralph, he told me it's going to be $300. So he came back in the room. And I said, listen up, dude. Now I'm 12. I'm like, something's not right here. You're shaking my mom down. This isn't going to fly. And again, I hear, shut up, kid. Mm-hmm. And that impacted me because I see how single women trying to raise kids go into these places, not just a car dealership. This is a funny example, right? But they go in and they get taken advantage of because they don't have that education. They don't have that experience. And so that's another like fundamental thing. I talk about this in my show all the time about becoming educated, empowering yourself. And, you know, maybe that's what we'll talk about today is some of the things you can do to be empowered. I
think so. And I think that's where, a great place to kick off, right? And I'm sorry you had that experience at 12 years old. I mean, I think, my youngest daughter is 12 and I can't even imagine her going through that experience and trying to be, being bullied by that sales manager and having that experience. Obviously it was indelible, right? And that's the thing that even going through my own divorce, watching my parents go through that divorce at 8 years old too. It's like, there's so many different indelible memories that really just shaped our lives. And there's definitely a lot of parallels. Having that experience early on where I was watching one of my best friend, I still have this image in my head, my best friend and his family bringing that box of, it was a Dole banana box, the ones that you see at the grocery stores with all the bananas in them. And they brought a bunch of groceries over. And I realized then, like, this is intense. This is not good. If other people have to bring us food because we don't have a means to be able to keep food on the table, that's a little bit of a problem. And it puts, a little bit of stress, on me and in my heart. And I think that's really what propelled me into the world of finance ultimately. And I always wanted to, make sure other people don't have those experiences, and specifically my kids. I want to make sure my kids never have to worry about those things themselves. And
think about how it made you feel. Think about your feelings when you saw that box of food come walking in the door.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, you're sad. It's a sad experience. And a lot of the people that we work with are just trying to figure it out financially because they don't, like you said, they don't have the education. They don't have the experience. They were never the breadwinner. And not only were they not the breadwinner, they certainly weren't the ones that were managing the household finances and balancing the checkbook and managing the budget and making investments and things of that nature. So it is all about education, which is why we're here, right? I mean, like trying to educate and the masses as much as we possibly can on these things so we can help as many people at scale, right? Which is why we do the work we do and why this podcast exists. So I appreciate it, man. So let's shift gears a little bit into the work that you do from a tax perspective. So tell me a little bit more about the work you do and like maybe some of the things you see relative to divorce and if there's any pitfalls out there we want to make sure people avoid.
Absolutely. And what I do in my practice, I do a lot of business consulting. I have a lot of small business clients, and then I have a huge individual and business tax practice. So I see this on a routine basis. It's kind of interesting. Like there's been some interesting conversations we've had with clients. I've had clients literally sitting across the desk from me and saying, we're getting divorced tomorrow, but we're getting these taxes done today because we want to make sure you take care of us. I mean, literally I've had that conversation, and it's been impactful because it's what you don't know that hurts you. And I put together a list of what I call 7 crucial tax tips to consider during divorce. And I'm going to make that available to your listeners. We can talk about that later. Awesome. But the first thing I think you've got to focus in on is understanding what this looks like for your filing status. And I say that because here's a little thing a lot of people don't know. Whatever your marital status is on the last day of the year is what you're considered for the whole year. So think about that for a second. You fill out your W-4 with your employer and you're saying, oh, I'm married. I got 2 kids. And then all of a sudden you're going through this divorce and you're thinking, well, yeah, my divorce is going to be final at the end of the year. No big deal. Well, here's the problem. It's like a boomerang, right? Because you get to December 31st, all of a sudden, now in your situation, you got 2 kids. Maybe you can do head of household, which may not be as impactful. But let's take the other role and say you're not the custodial parent and you've been assuming you're going to file a joint tax return all year. And you set your withholding up to be in that expectation. And all of a sudden, the end of the year comes, your divorce client comes in and sees me and says, all right, Ralph, I know you asked this question on your questionnaire. Yeah, I got divorced on the 31st of December. So I was pretty much married the whole last year. Mm-hmm. And which I say to them, well, pretty much doesn't count because whatever your filing status was on the last day of the year is what it's going to be. And I can still remember a client, this happened not too long ago, maybe a couple of months ago. This is a client that had a rental property with him and his wife. And it was a rental property that he would continuously lose money on. Well, he came in to get his taxes done. And I said to him, okay, well, you're going to be considered single for the whole year. And he's like, well, I didn't set up my withholding for that. Yeah. And he owed a ton of money because guess what? He was assuming, because his wife didn't work, he was assuming that, we kind of spread over the 2 taxpayers. And that's a big boomerang thing. So that's the thing I'm going to give you a first tip I'm going to tell anybody. Is if you know you're going to get divorced by the end of the year, fix your withholding now. Yeah. Take a look at those things because it could directly impact you. Even if you're filing a married filing separate return. A lot of people don't know this. If you've got a married filing separate return, you've got losses on rental properties, you lose those losses. You can't take them. So there's a lot of tax ramifications to that filing status.
What about business owners, right? The one thing you just mentioned there, you just reminded me, like a lot of the people that we work with are business owners. What are some of the pitfalls you see with business owners?
It's a similar thing, right? Because let's say that you're a business owner, and let's say worst case scenario, let's say you split the business with your spouse. Maybe it's a business that the 2 of you own together. What does that look like once the lawyers get done? Who's going to be left with that business tax burden at the end of the year? Let's say you're a 2-member LLC. I don't want to get into weeds, but let's just say you're a 2-member LLC and a divorce agreement is that's fine. You're going to take over the business. Well, now you're a 1-member LLC. Well, that's going to change your whole tax setup because now you can't file a partnership return. You got to file an individual return. And now all of a sudden, all of that income subject to self-employment tax. And again, I don't want to get into weeds and bore people, but there are definite ramifications to that from the business perspective as well. I say this to clients all the time. They come in because I do a lot of new entity setups. Husband and wife will come in and they're excited. They're opening up a new business, and boy, they are in love with each other, and everything is, unicorns and rainbows. And I look across the desk and I said, okay, let's plan for when you guys don't like each other anymore. And they look at me like I'm crazy. They're like, Ralph, what? No, we're in love. I'm like, that sounds good. That's great. But what happens when you're not? What is this business going to look like? And I think that's one of the things you have to sort of set out at the front end is what are the expectations if you're going to go into business with your spouse? And I've seen it work really well, and I've seen it be a disaster. So, to answer your question, it just depends. There's a lot of ramifications on the business side of things. I've seen situations where a husband and wife split up and the spouse needs to pay the other party money from the business. And then there's a whole cash flow issue. There's a cash crunch. There could be credit issues with somebody being a guarantor. There could be issues with a home that's used as collateral for a business loan. I mean, there are just all kinds of little spiky, prickly things on the outside of these things that you've got to be aware of at the front end and inform your professionals around you about all these things so there's no surprises.
That's where the education comes in too, because a lot of the people that we work with they don't know half of this stuff, right? We could do a 2-hour episode on some of this stuff. This is incredible. You said you had a list of like 7 things.
Yeah.
So what else is on the list?
So the second thing is consider alimony. Now that used to be a thing where alimony was like, oh, that's cool. I'll give my ex-wife alimony or my ex-spouse alimony because, they're going to have to claim that as income and I'll get a deduction. It don't work that way anymore, my friends. So back in 2018, alimony is no longer taxable income to the recipient, and it's also not a deduction for the payer. So that's something you need to understand when you're negotiating that settlement. The third thing, and this is probably the thing that causes the most aggravation and fighting at tax time, and that's determining who claims the children. This one I have seen this cause like police being involved in domestic squabbles when the people don't even live in the same house.
And the kids aren't even that valuable these days.
Absolutely not, but they certainly are. You almost feel like it's a ego thing, like it's a pound the chest thing. Like, I'm claiming those kids because I did this or I did that. And you got to understand what that's going to look like at the front. I think probably the most effective strategy I've seen is where people kind of split those back and forth. It's ideal if you have 2 children because then you might be able to each of you do what's called head of household, which is a more preferential tax filing situation. But you got to understand those things. And I'm going to get to the other part of that in a minute. The fourth thing I have on my list here is be aware of property transfers. This is something you need to understand as well. Now, most property transfers during a divorce are tax-free, but you've got to consult with a professional to understand what that's going to look like. Maybe there's some appreciated assets that are going to change hands. You got to think about what is that going to look like for capital gains down the road. Next thing here, and you and I kind of talked about this in the pre-interview a little bit, and that's those retirement account implications. You've got that 401k, that 403b, that IRA. You're going to hear a term called a qualified domestic relations order, which is a QDRO. Understand how that works because you don't want to get hung up not understanding what that's going to look like. That's where you need to talk to a financial advisor. And this may not be your attorney. This may not be your attorney's, area of expertise. So you're going to want to go find a financial advisor to really understand the long-term tax implications of that. The sixth thing I say, and this one is critical, keep detailed records. Keep records of everything. Because here's the thing. Let's say, for example, you go to file your taxes. No longer together, husband and wife split up, legally divorced. And it's funny because even in my practice, I have people that want to file like January 2nd. And I'll say to them, what's going on? I said, you just went through a divorce, didn't you? Yeah, I'm claiming these kids before anybody else can. And I said, well, I don't even have tax software ready to do it. And the IRS hasn't opened up their tax. Well, Ralph, you text me on the day that I can file. I want to get return done right now. And as soon as it's ready to file, you file that because they're racing. Because here's the deal, right? And that's why I say keep accurate records. Because what can happen is both parties can claim the same children on the tax return. And effectively the way it works is whoever files first wins the initial battle. So let's say you file that tax return on January 28th when the tax season opens up. That's when they're accepting returns. Well, you may very well get your electronic deposited refund. And then your spouse comes along a week or two or a month later and files. And I say to them, guess what, Joe? Your return was rejected because someone else claimed your dependent. Well, who could have done that? I said, well, did you just go through a divorce? Oh, yeah. Oh, that rotten, you know what I'm saying? It goes down this nasty road. Well, then what happens is we paper file the other person's return, and then we let the IRS figure it out. Well, what does that look like? So what that looks like is you both get a letter from the IRS that says, hey, folks, guess what? We've got a battle here. Both of you have claimed this child. So now all of a sudden you got to prove who paid more. Who was the custodial parent? Who paid for the groceries? Who paid for the school supplies? Who paid for this, the medical, all this kind of stuff? And a lot of people don't realize you got to keep meticulous records. I mean, records to the point of they spent the night at my house on these days. I paid for these expenses, those kind of things. And what happens 9 times out of 10, a client will say to me, well, that's not fair, Ralph. And then I'll get that letter from the IRS and I say, okay, well, give me all the grocery receipts. Give me all the school receipts. Give me all the days this person spent with you. And they go, well, I don't keep record of that. Okay, well, this is why I told you. Keep those meticulous records. And the final thing I put on my list, and we can go back and talk about these, it's not embarrassing to ask for help. Mm-hmm. I see this with a lot of people. They think they're going to navigate this themselves. A lot of them, they'll say, well, Ralph, all I can do is afford to pay for the attorney. The attorney's going to handle it all. Well, guess what? I'm not bad-mouthing attorneys. But when it comes to the financial side of this, most attorneys are clueless. So you need to invest in that professional, somebody like myself, somebody like you, who understands the financial side of this and the financial impact of this, because there are decisions that are going to be made that could have significant long-term ramifications on the tax side. So it's like one of those things that don't feel overwhelmed about it. Go hire, go spend a couple dollars with somebody, have a consultation, lay it all out for them, and help them put together a financial roadmap for you so you don't have that surprise thing at the end.
100%. If I could get this microphone off, I would drop it, because that was a mic drop moment, man. That was awesome. And I appreciate you coming over the top and confirming everything that I thought, because I see this happen all the time. I mean, people are trying to, these attorneys are out there, and again, not to badmouth them or anything, but I'm just call them like I see them. They try to go out there and figure out all the financial nuances of a divorce, and they don't understand the taxes. Never mind. Most of them can't even figure out how to manage their own 401k. Never mind figure out how to divide up yours and what's going to be the best approach there, and how to do the quadro and take distributions out and all the stuff, man. I mean, it's pretty incredible. So let's go back to some of these items here. Anything, how do I ask this question? Like, people walk into your office and like, if one of my clients is going to walk in your office and they're like, here's where all the stuff is, right? Like, here's all of our assets, here's all of our retirement accounts and everything else. Like, what is your approach when you're dealing with people that are going through a divorce, and what are the first things you want them to understand or want them to do? Right, before they even hire an attorney? Is there anything strategically that they can do and start thinking about?
I think strategically you have to think about it in terms of the emotional side of this. And I think you have to start with the end in mind, sort of. And if the goal is, listen, the husband and I can't get along, it's not working out, then you make a decision. Okay, look, are we looking to do what's fair? Are we looking to do what preserves because here's the thing, like, you and I both know this. If you've got kids, that relationship is going to continue. It might not be under the same roof. It might not be in an emotional or what's the word I'm looking for? Like a romantic way. But guess what? That relationship is going to continue. Mm-hmm. So you got to decide, am I going to burn this house down, or I'm going to try to figure out ways to be fair about this, be equitable about this? Because here's a dirty little secret. I'm a badmouth attorneys again. Attorneys love divorces because they make a ton of money. The more you fight, the more they make. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I say to clients. And I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. I'm not saying that at all. And they have a place. Don't misunderstand. I used to work at a law firm. I used to be the controller of a law firm. So I get it. That said, though, if you're asking me, what would I say the first thing? Can you guys figure this out on your own? Can you come to a place where, I'll give you an example. Like, my wife and I, we're together 24 years. But 5 years ago, we decided we were going to get a divorce. And to be honest with you, I was talking about this on my show. I was a tyrant. I was a jerk. I was a controlling guy. And my wife just said, Ralph, I had enough. I'm gone. I'm out. She moved to another state, filed for divorce. I hired an attorney, did the same thing. Now, God willing, we were 2 days away from our divorce being finalized. We reconciled and got back together. But we went through this whole process. Well, while we're going through this process, my wife and I at least had enough sense to sit down and say, okay, well, what does this look like? How can we work through this from a rational standpoint? And we talked about each individual nuanced thing. Now, we didn't have a whole lot of assets. but we had some assets and we were reasonable. We said, okay, you're going to do this. I'm going to do this. Now, my situation was a little more complicated. My wife's a stay-at-home mom, so she didn't have her own career. So I recognized that, I would need to be reasonable with her and give her some sort of, because she helped me build the business. That's just a true statement. So we figured it out, but because we didn't fight it with the attorneys, because I've seen clients go broke fighting over the dumbest things with the attorneys that at the end of the day, both of them are just penniless. They wanted to win that war so bad. They pitched that flag on the hill and said, I will not back down. I will not allow. If you come to me, I'm going to say to you, let's be real. And so to answer your question, that's where I start. I start off with do you want to have scorched earth? If you want to have scorched earth, fantastic. I can help you get this scorched earth, but you're not going to feel good about it afterwards. You're just not.
No.
I'm sorry. And maybe that's not a popular thing to say, and then the next step would be let's figure out what the assets are, because in a lot of cases, we got to do some forensic digging and figure out just what are the assets. Yeah. But I still come back to that thing of saying, okay, if you don't have kids, like my first marriage, I was married for 3.5 years the first time around. We had no kids. We had very little assets. It was you file the papers, have a nice life. I hope all things go well. We don't have any more connections because there's no kids. It was a simple process. Yeah. But most divorces aren't simple processes. So to the extent that you can invest some time with somebody that's reasonable at the front end, and I like it best when husband and wife both come in and I can tell them both, look, here's how it is. I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving you legal advice, but from a practical advice, most states, if you want to divorce somebody, you're going to divorce them. It doesn't really matter. You're not going to I'm going to keep you in this marriage. No, that's not what it comes down to. Most of the time, the fights are about finances. Let's just be blunt. Who's claiming who? Who's going to keep this asset? How much of this am I going to get? How much of this are you going to get? So if you can come up with a resolution ahead of time that works for both parties, hey, that's a score for you. And you're going to spend a lot less money and a lot less aggravation taking out this fight in divorce court or whatever that looks like, mediation, depending upon what state you're in. You're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. And that's the main reason why we started doing mediation last year. Because I'm a certified mediator and we can mediate in all 50 states for this very reason. And that's our job as financial, just like yours on the financial side, is whatever we can do to help you through this and figure out the financials and keep more money in your pockets at the end of the day. That's the route we want to take. Not every case we come across is as easy as your first one, and it doesn't sound like it was as easy as a second, potential divorce that you went through. And I'm happy that the two of you reconciled, by the way. That's an amazing story. But we see the most successful mediations that we see are two people that just have said, you know what, it's time for us to go our separate ways. How do we make this the easiest on one another? And keep more money in our pockets, keep ourselves out of the court system. And the beauty of the mediation, as you know, and it sounds like you do a little bit of this in your own practice, is mediating some of these cases. The beauty of mediation is there's no attorney and no judge telling you what you're going to do. And you're on one side of the table, your spouse is on the other side of the table, and you're working together to come to an agreement. And our job as mediators is simply to help you go down that path and make sure you're checking the boxes on all the 20 or 25 things that we need to help people get through in order to have an uncontested divorce in most states. But it's your decision and his or her decision, and there's a higher probability that you're going to stick with what you have agreed upon versus when you have to go to a courtroom, hash out in front of a judge, and the judge tells you what's going to happen.
I tell people that all the time. I said, you can do this one of two ways. The two of you can sit together and figure this out, and maybe one of you gets this and one of you gets that, or you can have somebody tell you how it's going to play out. And that is the honest to God truth. That's really what it comes down to. Either you can make these decisions between the two of you, give here, take there, or you can just wait and expect the judge to tell you, okay, here's how it's going to be. I don't know about you, but as a kid, I didn't want anybody telling me what to do, much less as an adult. So if I can prevent that and I can be reasonable. And the thing is, like I said, the thing that cracks me up the most of the time, people are arguing about the dumbest stuff. Just the dumbest stuff when you look at and that's what I'm going to say. Look at the 30,000 foot view. If you've got a house that's owned jointly and there's not much equity in it, does it really matter who gets the house? Just being frank about it, right? Or do you say, okay, there's equity in the house, but you've got a retirement account that's got more in it. Okay, I'll keep the house, you keep your retirement. And there are ways that reasonable people can work these things out. That's just the truth.
And that's the biggest thing, is you have to be reasonable. Nobody wins in divorce, right? It's our job as professionals to try to help people lose less. and you just have to be practical, right?
And you're going into something that's emotionally wearing on them at the beginning of it anyway. It's an emotional torture. I mean, I see that. And the thing that people don't understand, I kind of alluded to this when I tell you about my story, is you don't think about the financial challenges you're going to have at the front end. Because maybe you're a stay-at-home spouse and your husband paid for the health care. Well, now all of a sudden you don't have health care. So what does that look like? Or, there's all kinds of nuance to that, but you have to realize that you're starting a new financial situation, just like you're starting a new emotional situation. And you've got to surround yourself with people who can help you. Now, as a Christian guy, I'm all about finding that support network. Maybe that's with your church. Maybe that's with a Christian counselor. Maybe that's with a community of other people who've been through what you've been through. I know when I was going through my could be divorced, I went and joined this group called Divorce Care. And for like 6 or 8 weeks, once a week, I went and met with these people. And it was good for me because I saw things from a different perspective. And I was able to look back and say, dude, you really were a jerk. I can laugh about it now because my wife would probably still say I'm a jerk. But anyway, but you understand what I'm saying is, like, you have to re-educate yourself. You have to find that community support. And maybe you get to a point where you can help others because you've been through it. And that's huge. But those are all things that you have to consider at the front end of this. I'll give you a Bible verse. I like to throw Bible verses in my show. In the book of Proverbs 15:22, it says, without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. You got to think about that, because this is not your do-it-yourself project for the weekend. I know we've talked about this a couple times, but I think so many people go into it because if you do it yourself, here's something I'm going to guarantee. If your finances are already on the bubble, you're going to ruin your finances. Mm-hmm. You ask me what people come in. I see people who have wrecked their credit. I see people who have lost their homes. I see people who have cars repossessed. It's like a default jungle, right? I mean, it truly is, because they didn't understand the impact of what was really happening. That's just the unfortunate truth. But and as if the emotional toll is not bad enough, then you go into this financial landscape that you don't understand, and it ruins it. Like, talk about the financial of this retirement plans. Like, I'm sure you've seen this. I've had clients come to me after the fact. They said, well, we really don't want to talk to anybody about this because we don't want to pay anybody. So here's what we did. My husband, he liquidated his 401k, and, we're just going to split that money in half now that we get it. And I'll look across the desk and I'll say to them, well, who's paying the taxes? Well, what do you mean, the taxes? I said, well, first of all, you're not 59 and a half. So now you just got hit with a 10% penalty, and it's ordinary income to you. And I know how much money you both make. So you just lost 40% of that retirement plan. Well, we did what? Yeah, you just lost 40% of it. And see, you didn't want to pay $150 to come to a consultation with me, but yet you just lost $40,000.
Yeah, it happens all the time, man. I just put a post on this the other day. The DIY pitfalls of divorce. And there's so many of these companies that are out there. I'm not going to say any names or anything, but, or people go to their legal help service that they get through their employer that they pay, $12 a paycheck for and everything else. Then they wonder why the attorney isn't calling them back, and all the financial information is messed up, or the documents aren't processed the correct way, or they're at a standstill in the divorce and it's been 18 months and they can't figure out how to get this thing moving. It's an absolute disaster. And it's like, you paid $49 for this attorney, when there are attorneys, most good attorneys are somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 an hour that do it, and you're going to complain about it, and you're going to scratch your head and wonder why. It's like, come on, people, like let's go. And if you're listening and that's you, there's some element of shame on you if that's the experience you're getting. This is not one of those things you want to DIY, right? And one of the things you talked about a second ago was exactly what I talk about all the time on not only the show, but with clients and in other forums, is creating Team You, right? Which is, it's having your financial professionals help you, have your legal professionals help you, having your emotional professionals there, your therapist and your divorce coach, your religious support teams. I mean, like, I don't care what religion you are. I mean, there's every church out there and every synagogue and every religious sect out there has groups of people that are willing to help you. You need to be reaching out to them. That was one of the biggest mistakes I made in my own divorce, which was pushing people away because I had this, one of the guests on our previous shows used the term the John Wayne syndrome, right? Which I thought was perfect, because that's exactly what I did in my own divorce. And I was like, I'm going to keep my family at bay, and I'm just going to keep them at arm's length. I've got this. I don't want them to get involved in it. And it ended up pushing people away that I really, truly love, and were, family members that were there since the day I was born are no longer a part of my life because I pushed them away during my own divorce. So don't do that. You've got to surround yourself with your support teams, financially, legally, in religion, and all of it. You've got to do that, because that's the only way to get through this.
It's a multifaceted
you might have
thing.
To spend some money. You might have to spend some money doing it, but it's money well spent.
I call it an investment. It's an investment in you. And so many times we're foolish about making investments in ourselves. It might mean that you go take a class about finance. It might mean that you get involved in some sort of, like you said, I'm a spiritual guy, so go find a divorce care group or something like that, and talk with other people, because there are times you're going to feel completely alone in this process. I've seen it. I've seen ex-spouses come in and they just break down in my office. They'll say to me, Ralph, I'm doing everything I can, but I can't get ahead. And, I've tried hard. I'm struggling, man. I want to put the kids in college, but we're fighting over child support. We're fighting over this. And I try not to get in the middle of it, but I tell people all the time, it's kind of funny. Like, I wear a lot of hats in my accounting practice. And I would say more than 50% of the time I've got my counselor hat on, and just trying to help people through the nuance of the counseling piece, because it's tough, man. This is not for the weak at heart, man. This is not easy stuff. And like I said before, you think it's going to end, when the divorce is finalized, or when the kids turn 12 or 14 or 18. This stuff goes on forever. So, that's not a negative or a positive. I mean, what's funny, I'll tell you a funny thing I heard the other day. We were somewhere, and a couple said to me, he said, we've been divorced for 10 years and we've never been happier. I said, what does that look like? Oh, well, we got divorced and we moved back in together. We love each other now, but we don't have that piece of paper in the way. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, if that works for you, it's a different approach to it. But yeah, you got, like you said, I talk in my practice a lot about, surround yourself with your dream team. That's your attorney, that's your accountant, that's your financial advisor, your insurance agent, whatever that looks like. Because so many people just don't think about, I've got to make this investment in myself. Mm-hmm. And this is a great time to do it. You're going through so many changes in your life anyway. Use this as an opportunity.
Yeah. You are the CEO of your life. You might as well act like it, right? And there's not one CEO on this planet that's running a business by themselves. And so I think so much wisdom that you've imparted on us today, man. I'm super appreciative of it. This is the carte blanche segment of our conversation today. Is there any question I didn't ask, or that I should have asked, or anything you want to share? I know you have the 7 tips there that you're going to give away, so you can share a little bit about that if you'd like to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm going to point to people is go to askralphpodcast.com/divorced, and there'll be a document there. I'm going to ask for your email address. You sign up, I'll send it to you. And it's just a document that sort of lays out in a little bit more detail what we talked about. And if you've got a situation that you need some help with on the tax side, I see these things all the time. Maybe you have some what if scenarios, Ralph, what if we do this? What if we do that? It's all about arming yourself ahead of time with that knowledge so that it doesn't sneak up on you, get those surprise moments. And that's the thing I see in my practice all the time. People don't realize it's what they don't know that hurts them. And then they come in and file a tax return and I say, okay, well, you owe $12,000. Like, where am I going to find that money?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't create this mess. I say this to clients all the time. Tax preparation is great, but that's not where the value is. And people look at me like I'm crazy. No, the value is tax planning. And this is the time to plan. Like, you can hire somebody to do a tax return. I'm great at doing tax returns. I'm really good at it. I make them look really nice. I make sure they get filed. I make sure they get a nice booklet that has all the information. All the I's will be dotted and T's are crossed. The IRS isn't going to question it, that sort of thing. But to be honest with you, when I'm doing your tax return, there's not much I can do. It's all about that planning. And when you're going through a divorce, there's a ton of stuff that you can plan. Maybe you lose a battle, but you win this battle. And it's all about mixing those things together. And like I said, with that idea at the front end of what is this going to look like? But again, you can go to askralphpodcast.com/divorced. And like I said, I do a daily podcast. I talk about financial topics. If you're new to handling finances in your home, It's a great place to go find those things. Yeah, people say I'm crazy. I do it daily. I probably am crazy, but I just recorded the 302nd episode of the year today. I do it both audio and video. I do a blog post every day. And something your listeners might be interested in, I just launched a live show every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. You can get to that by going to askralphpodcast.com/live. It's an opportunity to come ask your questions. I don't charge a dime for that. You'll be in a community of the Ask Ralph crew. You can ask your question. I'll give you an answer. I won't spill like any personal information or anything like that. But maybe you're going through that divorce. You're like, I don't understand what this quadro is. I don't understand how do we handle this issue with the dependents. Just come to the live show if you want, or you can send in a question as well. But the live show is really good. We just launched it last week, and it's really cool because I get to see people right away. They can ask that question. They're not paying for a consultation fee. So again, that's askralphpodcast.com/live.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Thank you for sharing all of those links and all that information with us. We're going to make sure that listeners, if you're driving, you're not in a spot where you can jot this information down. Don't worry. As normal, all of those links will be in our show notes today. And I encourage you, if you have tax situation, you have questions about this, don't hesitate to reach out to Ralph. This is one of the best conversations we've had so far this year. And taxes are, definitely a bugaboo of mine. So I'm not a tax expert like Ralph is. So don't hesitate to reach out to him. I'm sure he'll be able to help you moving forward, especially if it's related to divorce. And if you do have questions regarding the financial nuances of a divorce and need some help there, we are always available to help at Allegiant Divorce Solutions. You can visit AllegiantDS.com to book a call, a complimentary and confidential conversation with myself or a member of my team. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more empowering conversations like this. Once again, Ralph, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome, and I appreciate the opportunity. And I wish everybody the best out there. And when you're going through that process, surround yourself with good people and find some people that can support you, because that's the most important, the most critical part of that whole process.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time.